I wanted to spend about 20 minutes with you going through some of the common species in Eastern Nebraska, Central Nebraska. I know most of you, and just talking to a few of you today, are from this area of the state. But my name is Doug Golick, and I'm an associate professor of entomology here at the University of Nebraska. I actually been working with bumblebees on off and on for 20 years. We did a project about 20 years ago when I was a master's student with Marion Ellis, which I know some of you have mentioned. You remember him and know him from years ago. I was his graduate student at the time, so it's a real pleasure to be here doing very similar work again on looking at what species we have in the state. And now we have a more modern project and a ton of folks here. And I know some of you, and I've met some of you before, different contexts, and somebody came across and knew that project from 20 years ago, which is amazing. So kind of come full circle. But I do want to spend a little time with you. We did this 2 weeks ago, and we went through all the species, and we debated on whether we should do that. And the glaze in people's eyes was too much. So I know Katie and others, and Jennifer and Rich, who's in the part of Xerces, went through and we have updated the PowerPoint. So we hope we give you a better experience. And one thing we're going to do is we're going to look at specimens. I'll have you for about 20, 25 minutes looking through those. Don't get on to me about dead bees. I have some boxes of them from 20 years ago. It's a very useful tool so you can see things up close. So anyway, let's go through these real quick. I want to make sure you have at least a reasonable idea of what we have here. So we have we have 20 species in the state of Nebraska. Nebraska is a cool state because we're along at 100th meridian, I think, right? So what we're thinking is we get the east and west things come together. If you're a birder, you're probably familiar with that. Same thing with insects. So a lot of those meet around Kearney, or not Kearney, but Ogallala, North Platte, where you see some of our western species of bumblebees come in, and we have eastern, but their patterns do vary where they are found in the state a little bit. So we're going to focus on what's found in the central and eastern part of the state. And some of these species are also found as far west as Sioux County, as far west as you can go in Nebraska. So we're going to focus on those bands that are very similar. I love how Katie has set this up in having you look at things that are very familiar and close to each other. One of my favorite bumblebees we're going to first talk about here is Bombus fraternus. And I think it's called the Southern Plains bumblebee. It's cool because in this area it's not super common. But as you get a little further west, it becomes more common in the plains, or the prairies, excuse me. See if we go here, a little bit of lag. Okay. The reason I think this one is cool, usually the specimens are pretty good size, even the workers. And I think Katie and others have mentioned, how do you tell the queen from workers? A lot of times the workers are smaller than the queens. They're produce the queens at the peak of the nest, so they have a lot of resources. Thus, they're bigger and put into them, they're bigger. But the workers of these seem to be pretty large for the most part too. And I love this one because if you look at the top of it, and I don't know if we talked about orienting these, they're going to talk about how to do photography of these, but you see these pictured kind of head towards the top, towards the north on the screen, okay? I think it's easy when you lay it out, and if you're laying your specimens out to look at them once you chill them, and you do it this way, and from the side, from the top and side take photos, it's real easy to orient to your pictures. So we're looking at this thing like top on, face down on it. And this one has a really cool pattern. If you look at the head, it's got black hairs, okay, on the face and the top of the head. This is the laser here, right? Oh gosh, I almost doing it. The big button in the center, okay. Wow, pretty faint. I need to get a better laser pointer. But pretty faint there, right? And then they've got in the front of the wings, if you're looking towards the head, all yellow. And they've got this black band in between the wings, where the wings attach. And then the back, it's yellow. It's a very consistent pattern in this species. If you look from the side, we do want to point one thing out too, towards the back here, while they're yellow on top here, they're black towards the back end of the wings on the side, okay? So we've got a great picture here. The other thing is, if you look at T1, those are T1, T2, there's 6 tergites in the females, okay? So the T1 means this first segment is yellow, T2 is yellow, and the rest is black. Confusing, right? Not so much with this one, because another way you can tell is they have very cropped hair. If you look at the species compared to other bumblebees, and we're going to see some samples of that, it's like they have a buzz cut. One of my favorite species, and if you look at that, if you look from the side, you can see these hairs lay very flat. Okay, okay? So we'll look at some specimens. I've got a few of those up there. You'll see the difference immediately. So this is on the queens. And the males look fairly similar on this one. So if you get something that kind of looks like this, it's probably a fraternus. This one is found mostly statewide. It's not one of the more common ones. It's not, I wouldn't call it uncommon either, but it's found kind of statewide. Also, we have three very similar, if you compare fraternus, and the two that you looked at earlier, Bombus pennsylvanicus, sometimes known as the American bumblebee, even though it's called pennsylvanicus, and then the black and gold bumblebee, Bombus oricomis, that Katie went through. They're two very, very similar ones. If you look up here, fraternus has quite a bit of difference, so I think that's why that picture is there, okay? It's where those T1s and where those tergites are in coloration. Again, it's found throughout Nebraska. Afraid I'm going to hit this 5 times. Oh gosh, there I did it. But again, these are collection records from when I was a graduate student. We compared stuff that was done by LaBerge and Webb, which were graduate student and faculty member in the 60s, and then also historical records from the teens. We have really 3 or 4 collection periods in the state. This will be our 4th one. About 20, 30 years apart, has been pretty consistent and collected. Some of these records are on horseback when they did surveys of the state in the 19-teens. Believe it or not, we didn't know what was in Nebraska in a lot of places till the teens. We still don't know, all this stuff yet. So pretty incredible when you look at those old records.
We encourage you guys to do your surveys on horseback.
Yeah, definitely. You can do horseback or ATV, maybe, right? And that's the cool thing about Nebraska. I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but as we all know, 99% of Nebraska is privately owned. So it's really hard to get out of these places, and we haven't been able to collect. My collection records along highways, and then I did some hiking up into some of the canyons where they did historically went horseback. Talk to me about that at lunch. I got some interesting rattlesnake and bull stories for you. So again, these are some common eastern species. The 2 that I want to make sure you have, you're going to see a lot of, especially in the first part of the year and then through even late. You're going to find these 2 species, Bombus impatiens and Bombus graciocolus, 2 of the most common species. Okay, Bombus impatiens is one, it's funny, I think people confuse this one quite a bit because there's a couple others that look very similar, but it is probably in the last 20 years has become one of the most common species throughout the state. It's one of those that has, I think it was mentioned, Jennifer, it's even found now in British Columbia where it was never found before. It's the one they use in the industry. I'm not sure in Nebraska that's why we have more than we had 20 years ago, but it's one of those I think has benefited perhaps from populations of other species going down. And so this one is characterized or identified by the top of the face, front of the face, between the eyes has black hairs, top of the head, usually with some yellow hairs, quite a few yellow hairs in most cases. They have almost completely the top of the thorax, almost completely yellow. You notice it's sort of shaded right here. They have pretty thin hairs. Sometimes they have a little different color hairs there as well. When they get old, when bumblebees get older and they're workers especially, the top they get a bald spot. Okay? So, and even in this case, the girls get a bald spot here, okay, not just the males, but as they get older, that gets worn and becomes a little harder to see that character. And then the other defining characteristic here, which one, if you can pull the wings apart, okay, that's the difficulty. These are all pictured like beautiful, like the bee's going to lay down for you. They don't know how to do that. They like to keep them close for the most part. That T1 is yellow and T's 2 through 6 are black. You're going to see a lot of these out here in this part of the state. Okay, so that's one you're going to see a lot. So just look for it. And I'll show you when we look at specimens how I kind of move them around so I can get good photos of those and again for specimens. So that's a real common one you're going to find throughout the state. Again, Bombus graciocolus. Another neat bee, one that's very common as well. It's a little bit different. I want to point out here on the head is where impatiens has yellow on top of the head. It has black. Bombus graciocolus has black. It also has black in front between their eyes, and their face isn't as long either. So if you look at graciocolus head on, it's got a little shorter jaw face area, and the head looks more round. That's just a sort of another thing to think about. Top of the head, or top of the thorax, very similar to impatiens, except for it does have a pretty distinct patch of black hairs usually, unless it's worn off, let's get because they do get bald as they get older, especially the workers. T1 is yellow. T2, though, the workers, especially the ones here in Nebraska, typically have a brown or brownish yellow patch of hair. It's a little bit darker, kind of greasy. If you want to think of gristiocolous greasy, it's a little bit brown, orange, kind of, not really bright orange, but kind of brownish yellow. The queens will, a lot of those, there's some variation, that'll be more yellow when you see them a lot of times. The other thing that's probably not characterized here very well, and I think it's the thing I've only seen in Nebraska, this is just a note, okay? You're not always going to see this, but some of the workers, the females, have a little patch of yellow hairs on the side of T3. You'll see them. And I think I have some specimens I'll show you there. And that's just, I've only seen it here in Nebraska, not seen it in other specimens. So just something to think about. That's probably maybe 20% of the specimens you're going to find. But know for this that, the characteristic here is that T2 is typically, kind of a brownish yellow, black hairs on top of the head. Again, this one is found throughout the eastern part of the U.S. Both species are. So this is a map. They kind of get these collection records and they try to interpret where it might be found where they don't have collections. Eastern half of the U.S., super duper common, both species. In Nebraska, impatiens goes, at least this is 20 years ago, it might be expanded by now, so the question we want to ask. Up by Valentine is where that furthest west and northwest collection record is. Gristiocolous is found pretty common throughout the state. That's still the case. So you're going to see those kind of in most places where a lot of us are going to be collected in Nebraska. Again, one thing I didn't point out is gristiocolous typically has a little bit shorter hairs than impatiens, but I wouldn't rely on that one being a particularly, it's people that do this a lot, it's for us a character we can look at until you see about 100 of these. You're not going to, you're kind of going, what do you mean more hairy or longer hairs or more even? You'll know when you do enough of it, but I wouldn't rely on that one in particular. So we got those. The last, I think, couple I'm going to talk about in this segment is Bombus bimaculatus or bimaculatus, I don't care how you say it, and Bombus vagans are two other really common ones that are very similar in appearance. Matter of fact, I would argue that these four on the bottom, impatiens, gristiocolous, bimaculatus, and vagans, can all be confused pretty readily with each other. Bimaculatus, this is an easy one to remember because it's got two sort of spots on that T2 or maculations. You can see it right here. So if we're looking at this particular picture on the right, it almost looks like a W, or if you want to think of it that way, or two little patches, and doesn't have black on the side. They are pretty distinct. It's one of our early emerging species in Nebraska. Matter of fact, I saw one in March 20th this year. Real early. I've never seen that. I guess I've seen that early, but pretty rarely. So they're one that kind of come out pretty kind of first, or seen early, and they kind of, for the most part, I don't know if you've seen this, but they burn out. You don't see as many by mid-July. So I think their life cycle ends a little bit earlier than a lot of the other species. They come out first. So again, if we're looking at how to identify these, the front of the face, black hairs, top of the head, yellow hairs, which is kind of an important character in this group. Top yellow with a patch of black hairs in the middle, okay? Pretty consistent. It can be a little bit more, more or less yellow on the top of that, depending upon the specimen you see. T1, yellow. The species has a particularly clear wings. These are not invisible. It's actually, whoever took this photo caught it in mid-flight, and they, so we've got sort of a high shutter speed, I think, or low shutter speed. So they're kind of flapping there. And then the bimaculation is pretty clearly pronounced in this drawing here, okay? That's T2. Has like I think it was a W, but they're actually two patches of hair. All right, clear as mud. On to the next one. Another really cool one you're going to see fairly common occurs. All these kind of occur in the same locations for the most part. Another way to confuse them, right? Because they're all together and overlap in time when they're out. Is Bombus vagans, top of the head, just like Bombus bimaculatus, why they're so easily confused. Top of the head has those yellow hairs, black hairs in the front of the face, between the eyes. Top of the body, thorax, the middle section where all the locomotion happens. yellow with a patch of black hairs. T1 yellow, T2 yellow, but this is one of those that, I don't know, I guess the hairs are longer on the sides and they get a little bit more narrow towards the middle on that T2. They almost have, I don't know if you can see that, they almost kind of looks like it dips in there, but it's actually, I think, the length of the hairs. And it's pretty, once you know what to look for, you see if this picture doesn't pronounce that or show that very well, but you'll see that sort of, I guess, dip in the middle a little bit, but it's actually length of the hairs. So that's one that, excuse me, allergy season. You see, you'll become more familiar with. And then this one too is like the one before, Bimaculatus, has pretty fluffy hair. They almost look really, almost in fine hairs. They look, so when you see them, you kind of know what you're looking for. You'll see that as well. Clearer wings as well, like Bimaculatus. So, and actually, here's some uneven hairs. Yeah, I guess kind of, right? Kind of see those a little bit taller. Found throughout Nebraska and the eastern part of the U.S. Sorry. Bombus vagans throughout the state. Bimaculatus is too. But you can see, look at this map. This is from 15, 20 years ago. That middle part of the state, we don't have collection records for a lot of those areas. Maybe I went there in the day and collected and they just didn't happen to be out. Doesn't mean they're not there. So that's one of the reasons why we want you to be thinking, yeah, they're eastern part of the state for a lot of these, but you can see we've collected them as far west as Sioux County and Northwest. So that's, there's a lot of areas to fill in to see where the range is. And this could be changed over time as well. Yes? Yeah, there is. And this is our first, we focus on the eastern part of the state this year. We'll be out west. And I know we've had Katie went out and did some collecting at one of the Sandhills Ranch as part of the maybe Legacy Project. Can't remember what it was part of. But yeah, we are. That's an area I was not able to do at the time as a grad student. So yeah, that's a huge area. That's an area for bees in general. We don't know a lot of what's out there. So different land, right, altogether up there. So really good question. All right. All right, so be aware there is variation within some species. So if we look at sort of the U.S., this is Bombus griseocolus, an example of it. These are all the variations that we have in the U.S. that we know of. Okay, see the two that are highlighted, the two boxes there, yellow and blue? Hopefully we don't have too many colorblind people in here. I am, but I can see those two colors. Well, wait, did I say yellow and blue? Okay, well, there you go. Anyway, those are our two real common ones here. We don't have most of these others here in the state. And again, there's one on here that I mentioned that is not represented here that I have specimens of that aren't on this map. So there can be variation of species. I will say, fortunately, in Nebraska, most of the species don't have wide variation. So that's the good thing. So don't panic on that. I say that just because, you got to look at the other things too to be sure.